We're live. Okay, welcome back to Thursday, May 29th at a little after 1 p.m. Our second meeting of Committee of Conference and related to S.123, our miscellaneous provisions for motor vehicle law. And we left off this morning, going back, we did check off quite a few sections. I would, if it's okay with you, I'd like to revisit section 17, the one we viewed in terms of the DMV language request. And we had said we would review the language. And I just want to make sure, and I didn't go back and watch the tape. I didn't go to the Jumbotron, but did we get, we actually have the language now and we can sort of agree that we signed that off or not. I think we'd agreed to it in principle, but I also want to just touch base quickly there. And I know there was potentially a question on that too.
Just the early renewal?
This was the part where we said the DMV is asking about for language is saying in no violation of other.
No.
Yeah, wait a minute.
It's
Wait a minute.
No, it's
numbers
not actually
change.
in the side by
Looks
side.
like
I sent you a separate
I can't go
document.
by the whole. That's right. I gotta have to be careful. It's
Yeah.
changing and numbers are changing.
So I sent you a separate.
Information regarding privilege cards and non-driver identification cards. It
Yeah,
was section 17 in both bills originally.
it would be 18 in the current Senate proposal. So, and I sent you copies of that earlier. I can pull it back up on the screen here if you would like.
That would be good.
Or
Yeah.
let's do that.
We just wanted to clarify something. Go ahead.
Yeah, but we wanted to see the language, so if you pull it up, that would be helpful.
I
I just really want to make sure that this change, while we're saying is minor change, technically, is it germane? Is it appropriate for us to make this change in this conference committee? But we'll look at the language.
Versus having our chambers consider it, is that?
Well, your chambers ultimately determined germaneness.
Okay.
So if there is a question of germaneness on this, first, someone would have to raise a point of order on the floor of either of your chambers. It would then go to your parliamentary officer, who would make a ruling on germaneness. If the ruling is that it is not germane, the chamber can then override the parliamentary officer pursuant to your rules by a vote of the chamber. And I can't remember if that's a majority vote or a 2/3 majority, but this.
germaneness.
Yeah, so germaneness.
It's just majority.
Yeah, so it's a vote to suspend rules. So you suspend your rules to consider it notwithstanding the presence of an amendment that's not germane.
You still pulling it up?
I am. Here we
So
go.
the section is open on both sides. Does that make the whole section available to be worked on in committee of conference? Maybe that's a question as well.
So this is in a little bit of a gray area from my understanding. I have certainly in conference committees that I've worked on in the past had both bodies revise their language to something in the middle or to address a legal issue that's come up. This, I think, falls into the latter category. This was reviewed by DMV counsel, and they noticed in light of a recent legal issue, so the memo from US DOT came out on April 24th, which is long after the bill passed the Senate. And I believe, well, it was before it passed out of the House, but they reviewed it, the bill that was passing out of the House, and identified the issue just before we went, or we got notice of it just before we went to the floor in the House. And so it can be, I think, that you can address this in the committee. You do have a slight risk that someone will challenge germaneness. I cannot speak for your parliamentary officer. I can certainly explain to them ahead of time if there's a pending germaneness question of what the reasoning is behind it, but ultimately it's up to them. And then it'll be up to the chamber to decide whether to proceed. All of this revolves around whether somebody actually even raises the issue. So,
Okay. All right.
Okay.
So,
Are you all set with that?
Yeah, and thank you.
Okay.
so I'm okay with leaving it in there. I think
You
it
wanna
covers
leave
us.
I think we want to leave it in there. We had some questions and member approach and whatnot, and we just wanted to revisit it. And it was one of the bigger,
Given the risks involved,
especially
especially the federal funding.
yes.
Mr. Chair.
But yeah,
I do just want to raise that I was one of the members of our committee who had significant concerns about this change because I was worried that we were basically giving into an authoritarian regime, which is flagging underdocumented folks through the licensure process. Ultimately, I would be very concerned if DMV changed any of their policy outcomes when it comes to people who are trying to access licensure, whether that be someone who a birth certificate gender identity doesn't match the license gender identity that they're seeking, or if their documentation status means that they wouldn't be eligible for Real ID, but they would be eligible for those other identifications. What my understanding is and why I'm comfortable with the language as it is now is because we're not changing our policies, is what DMV has assured me. I do think we should be very focused on this issue in the future if for some reason we hear that there are different requests from the agency, from the federal administration that risk that group of people. So, but I personally raised concerns, but have come to the conclusion that this is a good change.
And Senator, I would say that I'm also along that direction. As much time has been put into this area, which is why we appreciate you going along with the section of the updates that we are going to get within 30 days of the implementation of this piece, and another update, which I apologize, it'll be there 120 days or somewhere in that ballpark afterwards, before we get back in January, so that we're all apprised of this effort. With that, I guess I would continue to bounce around and stay out with no chronological order. What was section 40 in regarding to bicycle, that Senator, you'd asked us to potentially, might suggest we go there or not, if that's an area that we want to talk about. We spent some time on that in between, and I think Representative Pouch has some wants to reiterate our House position on that and bring back up the dialogue of where you were at and see if we can make some progress on section 40. What was section 40, which is now 44.
Yeah.
in the Senate.
Riding on riding on roadways and bicycle paths does make it nice and clear that riding two abreast is illegal.
Right.
I'd love to see a public outreach on.
It is.
Yeah, it is.
I shall not ride more than two abreast.
Right.
Yeah. No three.
So I think
No,
we've
three.
already agreed on a couple of the pieces. One is the education and outreach, which I think, I already said, I think it's probably the most important thing for safety for bicycles and, protecting vehicles out there too. So they know the rules. Going back to the section on the use of the pedestrian walkways, I'll say we opened this up for testimony and we had a lot of people come testify. And there were several, 2 or 3, I think, who implied they wanted to come and they were against what we were considering. This was one of the pieces we were considering, only one. But when we finally did get testimony, they were okay with it or neutral. They, pointed to other, they weren't against any of it, really. They were just neutral. And I think the agency too, in a report they said they were neutral to it, that there was no indication that it would increase issues or cause more opportunity for accidents, that the data shows either it's neutral or actually improves, so. But I think, what we did mention before would be to, move when this section would, be effective to after, 1 year, so that the training and the outreach materials and all that could take place, so that there's no confusion of what the rules are.
What's your proposed effective date that you're?
July 2026.
And,
July 1st.
Yes, thanks.
and this is section C, right?
Section C.
Subsection C.
Yep.
There was a question this morning about current municipal authority to do this. So I looked into that during the break. In its charter, Burlington has clear authority under its enumerated powers to of course, I moved to the wrong section of the section here. It has clear authority for its Board of Public Works commissioners to have control and management over the operation and speed of vehicles and pedestrian and vehicular traffic on public highways in the city. And then it's also worth noting, however, that under the general municipal authorities under 24 VSA 2291, municipalities already have the authority to regulate the operation and use of vehicles of every kind. And then it goes on to say, including the power to erect traffic signs and signals, to regulate speed, to implement traffic calming devices, to regulate or exclude the parking of vehicles, to provide and then it goes on to appearances in court for parking violations and so forth. That said, with broad grants like that, often there's ambiguity. And so it's up to a municipality to say, is this within the grant? So generally, the more specific provisions found in Title 23 around speed and so forth provide a lot more guidance on what's actually permitted. And so where possible, specificity is always helpful for clarity. Can't speak to the, policy here of whether or not to adopt this or what date to make it effective, but it does appear that you can read the statutes broadly enough currently to find this authority. And then the difference between Burlington and Winooski is that Burlington's charter has clear authority language in it. Winooski's did not have clear authority language that I could find, which may be part of the difference between the communities, but it may also just be that one select board or Department of Public Works decided to make this change and one is not.
Okay.
So.
Want to add?
I'll just add one more thing.
Yeah. Go.
Yeah, so, I thought about this and said, well, maybe I'll go to Heinsberg and, have them make these changes. The only crosswalks, we have 3 of them, pedestrian crosswalks with lights, they're all on 116 and we have no authority on that road. So even though I may be on my bike and wanting to cross with the crosswalk, I wouldn't be able, we couldn't make that change.
Yes, I'm good.
Check it out.
So,
Change
Jamie, I
the
guess
activity of it to
we will be looking to
2026.
change that section's effective date and we can. Check.
All right, so July 1, 2026 effective date.
I just follow up, just a question. Is it the case that, what type of road it is makes a difference? Because this doesn't say, highways of the state,
I think that's each statute elsewhere.
It's in 2030,
but,
So,
well, I guess what I just want to clarify is if Heinsberg can do that on a state road.
Well, so when you get to state roads, there's also the issue of the state traffic committee having jurisdiction over the operation of vehicles. So it's like a state,
Okay, so it's not just,
a municipality, for example, couldn't change traffic patterns or speed limits on the interstate, for example.
no, I'm sorry,
So,
let me ask my
yeah.
question a different way. Is if the crosswalk is there and we grant this authority, I guess July 2026, Heinsberg could make it happen.
Yeah.
No,
Yeah, it won't even be making it happen. It'll
Yeah.
become the de facto law.
Okay.
Yeah.
It's
Okay.
23.
Okay.
Right.
Even if it's it.
Yeah, so
All roads.
local, so with municipalities, they have the authorities that are granted to them within the general law of the state. So, for example, we've set sort of upper and lower limits around speed limits. And so municipalities can regulate within that range. But you couldn't, for example, have a municipality say, well, on all of our class 2 highways, we're going to have no speed limit. You know, they can set a speed limit within the range that they're allowed to. And then with this one here, it'll just become the de facto law of the state that when there is a crosswalk, bicyclists may enter the intersection and cross it, provided that they yield to vehicles and pedestrians that are already in the intersection.
Sure. Thank you.
So, yeah.
Yes, thank you.
Okay.
I guess I would throw out that if I picked the first two that we went back to, would you like to pick one over
you
there?
take a crack at one. Let's
not pick one, as long as we stay out of order.
We've talked a great deal about trails. We've been back and forth, and we're supportive of trails. So, but in this proposal, we're concerned about current litigation, as you've heard. Great deal of testimony on that, and we are concerned about the ability of municipalities to, should this litigation go in the opposite direction we're hoping it doesn't go, what that could do to liabilities for municipalities. So in the litigation, the ongoing litigation is a big factor in our decision. So what we would propose, and originally I had mentioned July 1st of 2026, keep the intent language. And I think, Damien, you can help us on this. If we put the language back a year, or move it up a year, if we wanted to keep the intent language in, the rest of the language could stay in if the date was moved. Is that correct?
So,
I mean, it's.
yeah, so the intent language could stay with the current effective date. That's fine. The rest of it, you could move it to a different effective date if you want to. Yeah, that you don't have to change the intent language. You could add additional clarity as to why if you choose to delay the effective date, you could add clarity as to that, but you could also just leave it as is.
Okay.
So
I guess my proposal would be to leave the intent language alone. They move the effective date. Now, this is a change from what I mentioned earlier in the last 5 minutes. Things are a moving target. My proposal would be to move the effective date from July 1st, my original proposal, 2026, to April 1st, 2026, which is when the trails open for the season. That's 10 months, putting it back 10 months instead of 12. I mean, it can only help. It shaves 2 months off the window for litigation to be finished, but that should be time enough.
Well, as you know, as you know very well, this is the second conference committee for some of us, and the leading direction of this piece is for sure. And we had made a commitment to your counterparts, and that we would bring it over and take testimony on it. I feel very comfortable saying that the entire committee is universally supportive of our municipalities and their rights to use that trail slash legal trail, what was formerly a class 4, however it may be, to choose to use it or maintain it or not maintain it. So the committee was very, very much in that direction. There are some other pieces and concerns, but I really feel that when people buy a property, and it is very clearly there that is noted in the maps of every piece that's done, that there is a right of way or a trail or a class 4 or a piece that at some point it may or may not be used, but you know that when you get into that deal. So, and the committee seems very set on that piece. And so I think we all agree that municipalities are in that position. So I know that you also wanted to speak on this piece, so.
Yes, I would just want to add that we did take a lot of testimony on the legal trails. And, we heard several different opinions from several different lawyers in terms of how they would approach this. We have heard some very convincing testimony from Cale Romanoff of VLCT, looking back to 19 VSA 310, just some different changes that were made to that, which seem to support the fact that the towns do have well, here's a quote: "A town shall not be liable for construction, maintenance, repair, or safety of trails." So that was an amendment made. I can't remember if it was the 80s, 90s, or in 2000, but so we heard testimony like that I think proved to us or clarified that legal trails, that municipalities do have the right to maintain or not maintain trails. We also, personally, I got a lot of letters from constituents just really kind of panicking about needing some clarification on legal trails. As we know, it's, outdoor recreation is really important to Vermont as an economic driver. And so we felt a sense of urgency in clarifying this sooner rather than later, given all those concerns that were brought up.
Did you want to add to that?
No, but I appreciate the intent language. I think that that's, a piece that we can point to that based on what we know, we weren't there in 2008 and when in the 1980s, when some of this discussion happened and some of the statutes were written. I think we're all in agreement that there's an expectation that there's no indication that other than towns have the ability to maintain or not maintain. That's very clear to their trails. So
I don't know if you want it to go again or not.
Well, yeah, I'm just saying, that's our proposal. It's mainly about litigation. It's not about, inhibiting anybody's ability to maintain trails. Now, this lawsuit we were talking earlier started in 2021. And people have been maintaining trails for the last 4 years. So I don't see anything changing with intent language only and moving the date back. To me, it's business as usual. It could give municipalities a little angst, but I think they've had angst since 2021 and they're continuing to maintain trails. It doesn't inhibit their ability in any way, but it does indemnify them from any litigation should we lose this lawsuit, should Tunbridge lose this lawsuit. So it's mainly about waiting to see how it's litigated.
Just a question. So is your intention in moving the date back to April 2026 with the expectation or hope that the lawsuit would be settled between now and then?
100%. Yeah.
I think that we just talked about the very first topic that we got into, where you have sort of branches of government and areas when we talk about infringement, I think that Senator White had talked about concern about when we have this all the way back to our social studies of sixth grade, we have three different branches. And the court is a very recognized piece, and the legislature is in their spot. And I can understand not wanting to infringe upon that other piece. And maybe I'm not a lawyer. We've got a lot of great ones around. There's a lot of different opinions on it, but I go back to sort of the roots of the piece. And I would ask that, I think that we could look at saying the idea of waiting to let the court move on their piece while trying to clarify in the intent piece of how we certainly feel as a legislature, but without overstepping into a judicial spot. I would like to think that we would be amenable to a compromising piece that recognizes the court has a job to do, we have a job to do, and we're trying to find a balance between both. So I think that our House conferees would be in agreement with your suggestion.
With the April one.
And to leave section 43 effective as upon pass or on July 1st of 2026, as it is right now. And the old 44, I've got to get used to the numbers. And the other portion to April 1st of 2026. And we will be back here in January. And if things have or have not changed, we will potentially be back at the same subject again. But I think that we've conveyed pretty clearly where the legislature feels about it, but we also want to be clear that we don't want to overstep our piece into the judicial area.
Yeah, and I would just lift up a gratitude for our chair on our side of this conference committee, because this has been certainly a topic that we've circled for some months. And I've also heard and received, as I know Senator Harrison has, the panicked, concerned emails from folks who are maintaining these trails. So I really appreciate the April rather than another date, because that, in our understanding, would allow for trail maintenance. That's typically when it starts. So I think that's also something to consider, is at least my legislative intent in this conversation is to allow for municipalities to feel some kind of comfort that they can maintain that season. Whether or not that gives them comfort to maintain this season, I think it's still kind of up in the air, but at least that gave me a lot of comfort from it. So I appreciate that.
Yeah, I appreciate it too. And thinking of that, this is really about certain towns that are very concerned about this. And I think moving in this direction will give more reassurance to towns. And like you say, once trail season comes, they can begin to start planning. So.
And let's hope the weather next year gets them out there sooner than this year's weather. I appreciate everybody's effort on a difficult topic.
Thank you.
As do I. That's not an easy, I don't know if you're here for ancient roads, but it harkens me back to the ancient road discussion, which I don't want to go there. So.
I heard about
Have you
that.
know? Yeah. He was there.
It's still happening, actually. in Burn.
It's a great time to recognize all of these distinguished careers across the table that we're back in this room that we're in now. This is where we could go. I mean, Lori was with us then. Look at where we can go from here. Well, you picked a big one. There's still a few more big ones out there. Damien,
So there's
Before you move on, we had also discussed whether to clarify the definition in there, the legal trail definition. Did you want to look at that language?
Yeah, pursuant to the section or.
Yeah.
Statute.
You have that.
I do.
Put up
I'll pull it
there.
up.
And this was in section, well,
It's it's 301.
yes.
The very beginning, because you set out the authority in 302 and 305, I think.
301 8A.
So there are two options. So currently it says trail means public right of way. That is not a highway in that. And it would have said the municipality has the authority to either cooperatively or exclusively maintain. So this would go back to the initial language and just kind of break it out so it's a little more clear. So it's just renumbering the original language while adding the maintenance authority later on in the two sections that actually deal with municipal authorities. The other one is just adding the words after that municipalities have authority to exclusively or cooperatively maintain, adding the words pursuant to the provisions of this chapter to sort of cross-reference the language we're adding in. I think both of them are just a little bit better than just saying that other language in terms of the definition, and help minimize muddying the waters there potentially, which I think my sense is everyone is trying to avoid that.
Muddying the waters, they're pretty muddy.
Yes.
But the amount of people, the amount of parties, the amount of interested parties that have weighed in as much as they have already, for us to put a change about definitions and pieces at the 11th hour without any of that feedback puts me right back to the conference committee I was in for the transportation bill that says we struggled to hear all the pieces. I'm not going to dig in too hard on this, but I want to say an 11th hour language change with the amount of people that have looked at this. How did we get to here? Concerns me. I'm on smile. If it's been so thoroughly vetted for so long that we still need an 11th hour change, I'm concerned that I didn't do something right in the process from the beginning, or somewhere in our time that we had in the committee. That's just how I react. Is that if we're making changes at this late, that I need to really look back at how I got to committee to its spot and understand that that's necessary. But it doesn't mean that sometimes that doesn't happen. I'm just saying that being a rookie, and the first time I'll plead my rookie case, I've said it 100 times. If I'd have known I was going to be sitting in this chair, I'd have paid better attention last year. But it does concern me, for me at least, to go back and figure out how did I not get the language nailed down before this.
Well, if it makes you feel any better, I'm not a rookie and I'm confused by it. And I was concerned. Damien, could you give us a verbal side by side of the difference, what the changes, how they differ?
Sure. So the current language, what it does is it says trail. So the current definition is trail means a public right of way that is not a highway and that previously was designated as a town highway, having the same width as the designated town highway or a lesser width if it was designated, or a new public right of way laid out as a trail by the legislative body for the purposes of providing access to abutting properties or for recreational use. When this bill was drafted originally, which was a couple of years back in the previous iteration, that municipalities have the authority to exclusively or cooperatively maintain was added in. It tracks the language for town highways.
I'm sorry, when was that added in? I mean,
that was in the original version of the bill. So, sorry, even in my discussion here, I'm not being clear. So that was added in to track what's in existing law for town highways. And I think the goal there was to make it match up to the town highway language, which provides that town highways are class 1, 2, 3, and 4 highways that municipalities have the authority to exclusively or cooperatively maintain. The thing with town highways is that they are being distinguished from state highways, which municipalities do not necessarily. And they also say, or the definition for town highways say, or that are maintained by the towns, except for scheduled surface maintenance performed by the agency. And so it's basically looking at that relationship with the state. Whereas for trails, the definition is not looking at that relationship with the state so much, because there's no question. There are no trails that I'm aware of that are maintained by the state that fall under 19 VSA Chapter 3. There are state
rail trails are.
There are rail trails which are under Title 5. There are recreational trails in state parks which are under Title 10, et cetera. So they're all set out somewhere else and they're separate from these. And that's so that what I'm thinking is that when this was originally drafted, it was match it up to the town highway definition. And then we're also adding in the town highway control language and the duties of, or the classification of town highways in section 2, where we do call out authority. And then the duties of the select board, where again, we call out specific authority to maintain. All you need to create this authority to maintain is those two changes. You don't need to call it out in the definition.
Okay.
And my concern with the definition is that someone can argue then if this case goes a certain way, well, you didn't have the authority to maintain it.
Yeah.
So now all your trails are not trails. And my brain is getting tied up into a knot here, but I don't want to open up in an effort to clarify the statute and provide this authority. I don't want you to inadvertently open up a new avenue of litigation over what the authority granted is. And by providing the authority in 302 and 304, you've clarified that authority. In the definition, you don't actually need to clarify that authority, and it might muddy the waters by opening up a new argument over this. And that it's not the same as the town highways, where there's this state-town dichotomy in terms of roads that are running through our municipalities. Does that make sense?
Is it,
Just, you asked the question originally. I
I
want to
was
make
just
sure you're all
gonna
set.
say, thanks for breaking that down, but if I broke that down even further, it's better language than previous language.
Yeah, I think it's just refining the language to try to iron out potential.
Clarify, it's clarifying.
Right. It's just trying to avoid any ambiguities in the statute. You've called out the authority in two places.
Yeah.
That will give the authority, clarify the authority, like your intent is. Calling it out in the regulating through definitions is always risky. So versus basically calling out what these are, which is they were either previous town highways that have been reclassified, or they've been laid out as a legal trail by the town. And that is what they are. So,
no, and I get it too. Just, we don't need it in the definitions. We're not defining the roads anywhere in there either. So, yeah.
right.
Makes sense.
Other than to say, I'm going to defer to the others because I really thank you for clarifying, but I'm still, I wasn't totally following that. So
Yeah,
I'm just
and
gonna be honest.
Yeah, this came up as a result of a conversation that I had with a member of the House committee who was approached by an interested party who said, well, wait, what if, the court rules in favor of the landowner? Does this mean, and it makes sense. And then I looked back at the legislative history and realized that there's a reason why that language wasn't included in the definitions. And I don't think it hurts your intent at all. In fact, I think it strengthens it to just keep it in the two authority sections.
Thank you. So will you put the effective date in the two sections, or will you have it?
I would do the effective date for so the section in your bill, if we use the Senate numbers right now, which could change because you haven't resolved window tinting. So it would just be section 48. The whole thing is effective April 1, 2026. So
Yeah,
there's,
I think that makes sense, just so that future folks have clarity where it says the authority to maintain trails. It won't have the dates up there in those sections.
I'm not sure.
So maybe I'm getting too picky, but
Oh, are you thinking
At the
that?
end.
Yeah, I'll just make all the changes that are shown on your side by side here. I'll make them effective April 1, 2026. I won't say as of April 1, 2026, because that would actually imply granting new authority rather than clarifying.
okay.
So, yeah,
And we would do that at the end, so it would be like this
Right.
section is where it
Yeah.
would say, so it wouldn't be in that section, it would be at the end of the bill.
Exactly, that's what I was thinking, that would make
Yeah.
sense. And so then the municipalities have authority to exclusively or cooperatively maintain. In the definitions, we're getting rid of that definition.
No, we're adding pursuant.
Well, I thought we were getting rid of it in the definition.
Yeah, so your options are either to, in the definition, eliminate Romanet I,
Yeah, that's what I heard.
Yes.
and then because you don't need to grant that authority in the definition, or to say pursuant to this subchapter or to this chapter. So you do not need to grant that authority in the definition because you're granting it in the section 302, where you specifically say trails shall not be considered town highways, period. A municipality shall have the authority to maintain trails, but shall not be responsible for any maintenance, including culverts and bridges. And then 304, adding to the duties of the select board, saying the select board shall have the authority to, number 24, at the very, very bottom, maintain trails, but shall not be required to maintain trails.
Yes, good. That's what I thought we were
Yeah,
saying. So this goes away.
No,
Or would
wait,
go.
no.
Yeah, the definition part.
No, if I'm understanding what you had up there before, it was to say in Romanet I, municipalities have the authority to exclusively or cooperatively maintain pursuant to this subchapter is what you had
There's
listed.
two options, and that was one of them.
That's
Yeah.
my preferred option.
Okay,
But
I was
you just
okay with that
told
one,
us
too.
that
okay.
we don't want to legislate by definition.
You can
But we'll have.
do this
three.
because I'm So
Okay.
I think if I'm drafting, I think the option of not having Romanet I is cleaner, but having Romanet I with the pursuant to the provisions of this chapter is basically cross-referencing that authority that you've granted.
Okay,
So if that makes everybody comfortable, I think it's still better than saying
Yes.
the other language.
Yeah.
I think your Senate conferees are comfortable with that option.
And we're going to see it all. Your recommended version before we sign off.
Yes.
Yeah, really.
Well,
that's a reasonable request.
We'd like to.
All right.
I would like to see that.
Okay.
I'll go back to my
Thanks.
rookie statement.
Makes.
So it's really
Yeah.
it's
Work stuff.
Right.
to find language and to go back and redefine.
right.
So, yes, flip a coin. Are we going back to Tinsing or section 8?
Let's do section 8.
Okay.
So, why don't you list your concerns or let us have it?
That's the easiest way to clear out the room right there. Where you going?
What?
Isn't that amazing that it tells something about the subjects? This next one's pretty important to a lot of people. And,
They're not here.
that is one of my questions in terms of who is advocating for this piece, or do we know? And that was something that came up in the testimony, that perhaps in some of the changes that were made, and I would go back to nobody wants to be against helping people that just by the definition of SSI and SSDI, that they are in a position that every bit of help matters. But I've also made it the mission of the committee, as I repeated earlier, that T-fund dollars are incredibly precious and need to be leveraged in every 80-20 and 90-10 that's available out there. And that has been our main priority all through. And when we took the testimony on this section, we had heard that it would be a nice have. It would be nice, but there wasn't anybody there was no champion of it, nor when the DMV testified on it. Perhaps it was in some of the leadership changes. They were not heavily advocating for it. And we felt strongly as a committee to stick with our main message of T funds are not the same as every other fund. And they have very clear needs and definitions. And this isn't, not that this isn't a need, but it could have been addressed through another committee and through another group of people that are normally served that way. That's our biggest piece. And I used it as a big part of reinforcing our main theme within the committee. And so it's hard for me to step back from that while acknowledging that it's a very important piece. I even go a little bit further that there was discussion in the committee, and perhaps Representative Pouch can help me out on this part of it, but when we met, when we heard from the aging and disability group, one of the suggestions was, well, if you had $308,000 and you could do something with it, would you give it out all to $20 increments to the portions that just the people that drive? Or would you look at a way with the $300,000 to help an entire group of people and not people that happen to need a learner's permit or a driver's license? So those were all part of the reasons why we felt to stay to the mission of to protect the T-fund dollars and to highlight to our entire body the critical nature of them. That's why we took it out, and it was sort of tied right to my overall mission since they got in the spot. So it's tough for me to move on this one.
I'm going to let Senator White address your initial question.
Sure, yeah.
On where it came from and who advocated for it and stuff. She was pretty involved in it.
Yeah, and I really, Chair Walker, I appreciate your frugality. I think that that's a really key message that you've put across there. And I too am a very big champion of the T-fund dollars. I think what we heard, and while it sounds like you may have gotten different testimony than we did, individual constituents reached out to both myself and the chair of our committee, who are on a fixed income, who are on SSI, and were not choosing to renew their licenses because they could not afford with their monthly income to renew their licenses. And I think that population of people is less likely to come and give testimony in front of a committee than perhaps maybe an advocacy group might. So I don't think we did hear from one champion, but we did hear from folks who typically are not comfortable giving testimony in the building, who are very affected by this, choosing to, like they make decisions around medicine or food, to go without licensure or renewal of licensure because of the fee. I would say that our chair has heard definitely from rural seniors on this topic, who are making very tight decisions every month with less than $1,000 coming to them. So while this is perhaps a move that wasn't pushed by the advocacy groups, I think in line with what we've heard with folks on a fixed income with the increase in inflation, this is one area that if they could have some reduced pressure on their renewal costs, that would help them be able to renew when they can and not delay renewal, which means choosing to rely on others or drive without an active license, which is a concern. And it would also allow for, so that's kind of where we stand. I respect what you're saying around T-fund dollars. This is a fee. So it's not necessarily in my brain the same as other T-fund dollars, which is a fixed revenue source. We fluctuate fees frequently. We change the amount of fees frequently. And I think if you're amenable to maybe a delay in the time of implementation, we would be open to that. But we did hear that the squeeze happening for folks who are on a fixed income is tight, and that licensure is one of those things where they may not be renewing. They may be delaying until a few months later when they do have $60. Like that can have a really big impact. So yeah, that's what I would say.
Well, I very much appreciate that, and it's hard to be on this, on the spots of these pieces. I sort of have to at least hit this piece again. We said no to the firefighters, to the volunteer firefighters. We said no to the volunteer ambulance. We said no to the loggers. We said no to an entire list of people, every financial dollar request on T-fund money that that was not in the original budget proposal. We said no to, and when the great work done in your committee and you're with your chair and your other members and having their other piece, when they were able to find additional money to bring in to the T-fund, and particularly around volunteers and drivers and that project, that made it workable, and it made it for me to feel like it wasn't T-fund money. So I spent an awful lot of time saying no to an awful lot of people, and and that was very much deliberate, and I think it helped with our House appropriations, understanding that T-fund pressures in terms of the big issue of not sending out the money is all combined with our effort that you'll hear next year about having to somehow cap off property and use tax, purchase and use tax that goes off elsewhere when we need to continue to fund our projects, and that will be part of what we're talking. So the offer of putting it and having the agency, the department build it into their budget along with the agency budget for next year is probably something that we would be okay with. But like I said, I've made a big practice of saying no, all particularly to fund money.
It's an issue. I understand it's a tough decision, but just to create the context, this is a disadvantaged group we're talking here. And with all due respect, all the other groups that were looking at things are drawing a paycheck, working folks who are not disabled, disadvantaged. So this, Becca laid it out there pretty well, Senator White issues.
And
it goes a long way now. It's $20, but here and there.
And I understand, and I think that we had some success this session in making sure that people understood the challenges of the T fund. So we appreciate we will expect the department and the agency to build it in their budget for next year as the effective date. I think we would agree to take the effective date of July of 2026 and keep it in.
Appreciate that.
Thank you.
And they will.
And we like to say no too. This was a hard one.
Yeah, we actually
I
did.
don't
say
like
something.
giving away
Wow, this was.
money from DMV, which is our best friend when it comes to transportation funds.
Right. Can I add something?
Please.
I appreciate what you had to say, Senator White. And this will also, when you look at this, I know people on SSDI, and unless they're talking with somebody, they would go in and they wouldn't even know that they would get this benefit. So we do need a little bit of time, I think, to build it into the DMV processes, or, so in the way we notify people about other options, they would need to notify about this, to ask for it, or what the process is to get approval.
Good point.
Right. Sure. So now in this bright sunny day yet again, we gotta move on to tinting. We have to move to tinting to keep this sun
I love that.
from warming up our cars.
Keeps it.
I understand that tinting is a regional issue in some cases. They're using it to keep their cars cool and whatnot, but I think that's, unless my notes are, because it's the case, but this is the last big area, the last area.
It is the last.
Before we, maybe might after this suggest that we take a break and let's count, and I hope that we could maybe, I don't know what your schedules are for the rest of the day, but I'm hoping we can come back to it after our election council's had some chance to work on it.
No, we're on the floor at 3.
We're off until 4. We're off until 4.
Okay. So
Okay,
that's
thank
good.
you. So we have
Two.
so you have floor, we're not gonna spend an hour on since.
No.
We can have the whole card done by then if we get it all since.
We could spend more than an hour until.
It was your piece and we took it out and we did discuss it this morning. And I'm not exactly sure, now
Where you are?
where are we at? Somebody want to bring us back up to speed and say where are we at?
Keep it.
We'd like to keep it, to make the effective date July 1st, 2026. It gives the DMV folks a chance to, I don't know when
Your
you're,
delayed date was already July 1, 2026. Sorry, I have to provide neutral information here.
so yeah, okay, we're gonna stick with our.
Thanks for bending. Maybe I'll make it a little bit, at least to start on the piece, but in this less than 70% and our side window with shader tinting material is not less than 70. We are saying that in effect by this, that we are going to have a tool to measure the tint.
I mean, yeah, there's no doubt. We talked about a card, but I mean, to do it right, it's $100 tool. And we're asking, I mean, we heard, maybe it was here, we heard earlier too, that, during inspection, it's advisory now unless you're tinted up your front window, you're gonna get denied. But then you go out in the street and nobody is gonna accept it. I'm repeating myself because I said this
No, that's
earlier, I
okay.
know.
No, that's.
But you're going to take that advisory, get your car inspected, and you're gonna drive down the road, so I'm good for another year, I'm not doing anything. And you're gonna get picked up, possibly, these days, I know it's a rarity these days, but you could get picked up for over tinted windows, and that wouldn't pass the VSP, Vermont State Police folks, or any local sheriff for that matter, constable. You know, you could be pulled over, and I don't know what the fine is. Do you guys? Tinted windows? That'd be $100 at least. So, I mean, it just adds a little clarity. We've been talking about it for years. And to me, that aside, I'm putting myself in a uniform as a law enforcement officer walking up to the side of a car that I can't see in, and they can't, I don't know how they can see out of those things, to be honest with you, but they can. And it's safety. Safety for a police officer, safety for a biker driving by, and you don't make eye contact with them. You know, when I see a biker coming up on the left and he's looking at me, are you gonna let me go? And I'm looking at him and saying, yes, I am. Or, you know, it's an issue. So I think eventually we have to fix it. And I think putting it out a year gives people plenty of time to.
I mean, I would just add that I think we are all in agreement on the safety issue and the need to resolve that a motorist can be kind of given a light warning at an inspection and then not do anything about it. That there's a loophole there that doesn't make sense. But, and I think I'm repeating myself now, but just, you know, the testimony we took from the police officer regarding the inspections, just I think we had concern about the cost of every inspection station having, and every police car having to equip themselves with this. What we heard was anywhere between $100 and $400 piece of equipment to adequately measure the tint. And we do have that. Well, I'll stop there for now. Yeah. Well, just, I guess the other thing I was going to add is we do have that language, or maybe it's towards the end of this, regarding the report on motor vehicle purchase and use tax and inspections. So if we wanted to have some time and get some, you know, more information from the DMV in terms of maybe how to resolve this in that report so that we could address it next year, that is just an option.
Yeah, and I think that report, I don't want to speak for the agency, but I think that report should be done by next July 1st.
I think when the modernization piece goes through from November on, you gotta start with miscellaneous motor vehicle. We won't see it until March, and by then, 4 or 5 months into the next rollout, we intend as a committee to look pretty hard back at inspections overall, because I would say we had to work pretty hard to have a floor amendment withdrawn. I'm pretty sure the vote count, without some work, we'd have passed an elimination or at least a reduction to every other year. And because how we're building a mileage-based user fee system that might be involved in looking at inspection mileage every year, we've got some work to do to figure out what exactly are we using inspections for, and how does it change with the technology of vehicles significantly. We talked about this in committee quite a while, which is part of the reason why we took it out. I think we're going to revisit the pieces of it. I would also have to say that I find passing this, if it were, when I heard the Vermont State Police say this is not on their radar of things to enforce, they're not going to have the equipment to do it, and then they'd have to, if they were to be an adjudicator, you know, an appeal or a committee, they go to court on it. The calibration, the work, the piece, and you will get some compliance level, but it's not going to solve our problem at the level that we all want, that safety in the front. I feel like we're not quite able to really get at what we want to get at. We're going to pass it and we're going to say that we did it, And I'm just expressing that I don't think it's gonna get us, we're not gonna be able to noticeably, when I drive back and forth every day and I start looking at the amount of windows, a year after this passes and a year after that, I don't have a lot of confidence that there'll be less tinted windows, that there's more to this to be done. So with that, I also looks like, I'm not sure if you want to add to that.
Yeah, and, it may be that, we, again, it is a safety issue, 100% safety issue. And, perhaps in the time before this becomes legislation, there may be alternatives on how we determine this. We've got this 70%, which comes out of the federal, register. And, but, it may be helpful just to, during the rulemaking or whatever, to actually determine this is how it's done. And then we will know this is how much it costs. And this is what we expect the inspection folks to do, and this is what we expect Vermont State Police and law enforcement to do. I think I'm a little worried because we're not really sure how much effort this is going to take to get there. And I think we, just want to understand that before we pull the trigger and say, let's go do it. And I think we got pushback from inspection and from the state police. They're like, they've already got all this equipment in their car that's all calibrated for, DUI and whatnot. And now this is just another piece they have to have tracking. So I think a little time to determine what that impact is would be helpful. I'm not quite sure how we would do it, but we have a little time now, but I'm not sure whether we'll be at that spot to be able to really understand it.
We may just want to have a little bit of a conversation separate from this
Yeah.
before we.
We're making a decision.
Yeah.
Give us 2 minutes.
We've been over an
Oh, yeah.
hour. I think everybody could
Let's
use
take
a break.
Sure.
Let's come back at 15 or
Yeah.
2:20. Does that work?
Yeah, and
What do we-
you said there's a report. Or
That's part of that other
We
step.
agree with that.